And Professor, I hate to ask this because I know it's maybe a little unnuanced, but I mean, we have this new geopolitical alignment, a bloc of China and Russia, and suddenly they have a shared ideology, an autocratic outlook on the world. That to me sounds very familiar. Is this a new Cold War? And is the Cold War even the correct analogy to be looking at what is happening now today?
Well, that is interesting. Many historians, if you look at what various historians have written about it, that's not a new question, right? Where historians have been and political scientists have been writing about for the last few years, trying to understand where the world is going, and asking that question: Are we moving towards another Cold War? And historians generally tend to be skeptical about this. Here's the reason. They say, well, the Cold War was a very unique phenomenon because it represented, it was a struggle between communism and capitalism, two universalist ideologies, and that's just no longer there. That's no longer there. So whatever you call this today, it's not the Cold War, it's something else. Also, they've been saying, well, the Cold War was a bipolar phenomenon. So you had the United States, you had the Soviet Union, and what we have today is we have a bunch of different centers of power, and that's all obviously very different from the Cold War. So therefore, the analogy with the Cold War is not relevant, is not accurate, and should be shunned because it limits our toolkit, or it brings us back to kind of confrontational policies that we should be avoiding. They also say that now economic interdependence between China, let's say, and the United States is just not where it was during the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. So there are all these reasons to argue that the Cold War was a unique phenomenon. But I would say also that there are continuities between the Cold War and the period that we're living through now, and those continuities are often overlooked or misunderstood. The first important continuity that I would highlight is the presence of nuclear weapons. Nuclear revolution that happened in the decade between the first U.S. atomic test in 1945 and, well, let's say the proper Soviet thermonuclear test. Well, just say the late 1950s. We have development of thermonuclear weapons, and then, of course, the missiles of various ranges, including the intercontinental ballistic missiles. So what that nuclear revolution did to global politics was truly transformative, because now great powers could no longer conceivably fight hot wars. Why? Because this was too dangerous. The whole world could go up in flames. We could have a nuclear apocalypse. Has the situation changed? Well, I would beg to disagree, because we still have nuclear arsenals, and some of the most powerful nuclear arsenals are possessed by countries that are implacably opposed to the West and to the United States, including, of course, Russia and China. So the nuclear factor remains. The world is still a very dangerous place. We forgot how dangerous it was. We forgot about the early fears of nuclear war. And we kind of got used to this idea of living in the shadow of nuclear war and just kind of filed it out of sight and out of mind. But I think now we are returning to the realization that the world could still be destroyed, and there's sufficient nuclear power in the world to actually, destroy it. So that's an important continuity between the Cold War and the post-Cold War. Here's another interesting continuity, and this is something that especially American historians and American political scientists don't pay enough attention to, because some of sort of their understanding or their stories about the Cold War are sometimes really US-centered, and they don't look as much into motivations and ideas of the other players in the Cold War. If you look at the Soviet side of the Cold War and ask, what were the Soviets trying to achieve during the Cold War? Was it the triumph of communism globally? Maybe, but I would say the fundamental goal of Soviet foreign policy during the Cold War was to challenge the pecking order of global politics and to be recognized by the United States, because only the United States was in a position to award this recognition, as America's equal. That really shines through in Soviet approach to global politics from Yalta in 1945 to Malta in 1989. Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Gorbachev, they all sought this Western recognition as partners of the United States and as the key adversary of the United States. They wanted to be up there with the United States, co-managing the world, so to speak. Has the situation changed? I don't think Russians today would dream of co-managing the world with the United States. I think the Russian policy elites understand that Russia is no longer the superpower that it once was. It's still a respectable power. Nevertheless, they still want to have a particular place in that global hierarchy that is at least on par with the United States and with China. They want to be up there. And I think the Chinese approach to global politics is also underpinned by similar considerations. So it's very much a struggle of great powers, except that now we have nuclear weapons. So it's not the same as struggle. Some historians say, well, now we have a situation that is very similar to the First World War or the period immediately preceding the First World War. I would beg to disagree with this because during the First World War, we did not have nuclear weapons. And today, the great powers have nuclear weapons. Not all of them, but many of them do. And most importantly, China and Russia do. And of course, so does the United States. And that is a new situation that only really emerged with the nuclear revolution, and I think continues today. So to sum up, yes, there are differences, but yes, there are also important continuities that I think should give us pause when we talk about the question of whether or not we're living through another Cold War.